when we start to see our bodies as not, or maybe even our symptoms as not a deficiency, but actually a signal, a very intricate, complex, like inner dialect that our bodies are giving us these messages, then, that's a very personal, individual kind of um, dialect.
I do believe that cannabis is this really useful tool that helps you to like better navigate society and the burdensome aspects of the neurotypical world that we live in.
Welcome to Living in the Weeds, a series that explores the lived experiences of neurodivergent people who consume cannabis, with your hosts, Jessica of Jessica Riley Writer and Lucy of Lucy's Natural Remedies. Today we've got two incredible guests. Both of them are pharmacists and medical writers with a deep understanding of cannabis and neurodivergence. Welcome, Dr. Simi Byrne and Dr. Megan Hollingsworth.
All
You
right.
want to go first?
Sure. My name is Simi Byrne, and I am a medical writer and a pharmacist. I specialize in cannabis. Prior to becoming a medical communications specialist, I worked in a traditional clinical practice as a pharmacist, mainly in long-term care, geriatrics, healthcare administration. And so I did that for about 10 years and got into mind-body medicine. I'm a mindfulness and yoga instructor, was simultaneously getting a lot of questions from patients, physicians, caregivers about cannabis, and didn't know. I found that myself saying, I don't know. And I didn't like that because as pharmacists, we're the drug experts. We have doctorate degrees in drugs, and why don't I know about this? And so out of curiosity and trying to answer those questions, I got into more and more of the research and the reading about it, and wanted to find out I just got so curious about it and was thinking, like, how can I get paid to read and educate about cannabis all day? And so that's how I found my way into medical writing, and I absolutely love it. And since then, I've written for all kinds of clients, what in industry, in health tech, in academia, in health education, all kinds of different settings. And then I'm also part of in academia, part of a new cannabis studies program, an interdisciplinary cannabis studies program at the University of Tulsa, where I will be teaching the first cannabis pharmacology class starting in the spring, which is really, really weird because that's actually my alma mater too. So I'll be in the same classrooms. I wouldn't never have believed that I would be teaching about cannabis on campus, but here we are. So it's very exciting.
That's an amazing full circle to come back to the places where you were beginning your career and just, you're taking in all of this information, and now you're coming back and you're going to be able to lead all of these new students in this amazing field of cannabis. That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Megan, how about you?
So my name is Megan Hollingsworth. I am also a pharmacist, and I am just starting on my medical writing journey right now, which is how I met Simi, actually. She's basically a mentor for me. But my backstory, so I started as a retail pharmacist many, many years ago. I worked at one of the big box chains for, I don't know, eight or so years, and it was a lot. And I had a lot of patients that were coming in asking about cannabis and should they start using it. They were, on, opioids or pain medications. They didn't want to be on it any longer, or their doctors weren't giving it to them any longer because, opioid epidemic. What should I do to replace this? People that were just looking for their own autonomy. They wanted to, make more of their own health decisions. Just a lot of questions. And like Simi, I didn't know any of the answers. And that was really frustrating as a pharmacist because I should know the answers, or should it at least be able to point you in the right direction. So, I was burnt out. And I also wanted to understand cannabis, and I saw that there was a lot of potential there. So I left retail pharmacy and I decided to become a medical cannabis pharmacist. So I began working in a medical cannabis dispensary in Philadelphia. So I was there for about a year and a half. I loved it. It was amazing working with patients, seeing the transformative effects of cannabis, and you know, really helping to like guide them on this journey. And just it was eye-opening. It was amazing. But at the same time, I felt like I still couldn't answer a lot of the questions. There wasn't a lot of research to rely on. I didn't know how helpful I really was being, because it's not like, the regular pharmacy job, or I know this drug does exactly this and this is exactly what to expect. It was very hard for me. But there was still so much potential. I really, really wanted to learn more. And I, looked into the pharmaceutical industry, and I decided, well, I guess I was fortunate enough to get a position as a medical science liaison, working specifically with the drug Epidiolex, which is a purified CBD medication. And I should say, indicated for specific epilepsy syndromes. And it was really eye-opening. And I really started to see the nitty-gritty science. And that definitely expanded my horizons even further. But recently I had some shifts in my life and I needed to make some changes. And I still wanted to learn as much as I possibly could about cannabis and get paid for it. And that's what led me to medical writing, so that I could still be in the world of cannabis, still see all of the transformative effects, still be on board with all of the amazing things that are going to be coming in the future. Yeah, that's basically my story in a very big nutshell, because I'm rambling. Because I'm neurospicy.
3 cheers for neurospicy rambling, because it gets us to all the topicals. It gets us to all the other topics that we want to talk about. So it's funny because when I was in college, I ended up having 2 knee surgeries, right? And my appendix taken out shortly thereafter. So I was at the pharmacies or the pharmacist all the time. And I kept thinking, like, maybe I should go do this. And I knew that because I liked cannabis, that I would never be able to pass whatever, drug testing that is required as part of your job. So it thrills me to be able to speak to 2, pharmacists who are understanding of the importance of cannabis and its role, and how it can be just another tool in our, health box, if you will, to help us going forward. So you were mentioning a bit about how the nice part about pharmaceuticals is that you can take that, 200 milligrams of ibuprofen, and you know exactly how it's going to be administered, and you know exactly how long it's going to take, and, give or take a bit, but you have a better understanding of the predictability of the nature of pharmaceuticals. And with the endocannabinoid system, it just makes things a little bit tricky. So let's talk about the endocannabinoid system and how balancing that can really help us mitigate some of the symptoms and traits of neurospiciness. Who would like to start?
Me?
Yeah, go for it. So the endocannabinoid system is a very complex system of homeostasis, right, within the body. So homeostasis means balance. So this is going to be controlling and regulating, modulating on an ongoing basis all kinds of different functions in our body, whether it's rest, whether it's digestion, our metabolism, our immune systems, pain, all these different functions depend on endocannabinoids, which are endogenous, or our body makes our own cannabinoids. And that's how those were discovered, is because we had the cannabinoid receptor discovered first and found that cannabinoids in cannabis plants are interacting with those. Well, it turns out we create our own endocannabinoids. I am very fascinated with this and kind of my context with cannabis in general, like more broadly. I come from a South Asian heritage, and I mentioned, I'm a yoga and meditation, long time, decades, kind of lifetime practitioner and instructor. And I am really interested in cannabis from that lens, because it's a plant. It's not a pill. It's not a single molecule, right? And this is one of the traditional teaching plants in Ayurveda, which is the foundational healing system of yoga. So I get really nerdy about that. I won't go into that, but basically, how the endocannabinoid system is modulated, not just from cannabis, but from all these other things we do, like stress reduction, like what our nutrition is like, what our environments are like. And so I love the idea of a plant medicine like cannabis being a teacher so that it can help illuminate, oh, okay, this is what it feels like when I don't feel stressed. This is what it feels like when my anxiety is lower. This is what it feels like when I can manage, this stream of thoughts that so many neurodivergent folks, have constantly. So this is really important because it can be an illuminator or a teacher of, oh, this is how I feel better, or like, this is how my body feels when I feel angry, or this is how my body feels when I feel happy, or whatever it is. And so we can really get to know ourselves. So I love that as a gateway for holistic health. But that was kind of digressing. So overall, endocannabinoid balance, I think, is something much more than just like, here's a receptor and here's a molecule and it fits in here and now you're balanced. It's the whole ecosystem physiologically of your inner state and how it connects spiritually and with your environment. And I think it's so fascinating from that lens.
That's so
kind of
interesting. It's so interesting that you talk about the environment, because one thing that we were noticing in this series from people talking about their lived experiences is that people who grew up in a bit more of a high-strung, more traumatic environment end up needing cannabinoids or terpenes that are more on like the indica side of things, right? Because they are vibrating already on such a high level. And we were hypothesizing in the series, like, maybe it's because of your background and what you're used to, and your body and your endocannabinoid system has been, amped up to this level, where somebody else who did not have those experiences will fall asleep very easily with something with an indica. So I'm glad to hear that wasn't just us stoning around and thinking. How about you, Megan?
So everything that Simi said, I like to think of the endocannabinoid system as a thermostat. I also like to think of it as a Goldilocks system. So it wants to bring you into balance. Like, this is too hot, this is too cold. No, we want to be just right. And that's what your endocannabinoid system is really trying hard to do. But of course, there's all these other circumstances that come in and play a part, and kind of disrupt that system. So when it comes to neurodivergence, and kind of going like the nerdy route on this, there has been some like earlier research that shows that some of these symptoms may be linked to decreased endocannabinoid levels. So those cannabinoids that we are making within our bodies, that we make on demand, so there's some sort of disconnect. We're just not producing as much as we need to make. So it's this called clinical endocannabinoid deficiency. Okay, don't quote me. I don't know if that is technically a scientific term, but I just said it out loud. So don't let the haters come for me in the comments. But when we have this deficiency, it can be linked to symptoms, or impact our mental health. It can impact inflammation, which then impacts pain, which also impacts GI issues, and inflammation also impacts mental health as well. So basically, we're not creating enough of these signaling molecules that we need to interact with these receptors in our brain. And, that's what controls these really important brain functions and activities, and energy metabolism, and, stress in our immune system, and all of it. So it's all related. So then we use cannabis to help fill in what we're lacking. So we replace those endocannabinoids with phytocannabinoids, or the cannabinoids that we're getting from the plant. So that's kind of how it blends together, because neurodiversity, I think a lot of times we can get stuck in that it's just like a brain health issue, but really there's a lot of complex overlapping issues that fall into like pain, GI, stress, mental health. I think someone said sensitive brain, sensitive bodies, and that's that's us in a nutshell. So yeah, the endocannabinoid system just fitting in with all of that, and also regulating some of these systems like the dopamine signaling or serotonin signaling. And of course, we still have a lot to learn there, because if there's anything that I know about cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, is the more that we learn, the more that we understand, the more we realize that we have so much more we need to learn and understand. So that's where I see the endocannabinoid system and neurodivergence and how they kind of fit together. Yeah, that was the nerdy side of things.
This is the time to nerd out, I promise. And I really like that thermostat analogy, because it's like, okay, for me, let's say 74 degrees is comfortable because that's what is comfortable for me. But for somebody else, their endocannabinoid thermostat might be more comfortable at 70 degrees. And if I'm hearing you correctly, is if I make sure that my endocannabinoid thermostat, right, if my endocannabinoid system is set at the right degree, then that means that my other neurodivergent traits like anxiety or rejection sensitivity dysphoria or time blindness even are going to be mitigated because I've got that thermostat at the degree that it needs to be at.
Exactly. Like that's how I think of it. So yes, everyone's thermostat is a little different, and we all have these different temperatures, which also makes, trying to understand cannabis and how it fits into neurodivergence difficult, because everyone is so different. But also, oh, well, there's my neurospiciness. I just forgot what I was going to say. But I do believe that cannabis is this really useful tool that helps you to like better navigate society and the burdensome aspects of the neurotypical world that we live in. And it's not a fix. It doesn't immediately make everything better, but it is this really amazing tool. And when we bring in some of that more spiritual side, the spiritual side of things, and our overall well-being, through diet, exercise, meditation, just, taking care of ourselves, stress reduction, huge. I know it's just like, how the hell am I going to reduce my stress in the world that we live in? But focusing on this more holistic aspect of self, we really can mitigate those symptoms and those issues that stand in our way sometimes. Sometimes they're superpowers, though. That's another way to look at it.
Simi, how would you say neurodivergence could affect other systems outside of the brain in terms of physical and emotional manifestations?
Oh my goodness. So mainstream, like status quo Western medicine, teaches the body as separate systems. Like there's the nervous system, there's the immune system, there's the gastrointestinal system, and they're separate systems with separate pathologies and separate treatments. But as we can clearly see, we're not separate systems, we're whole people. And our bodies are connected to our brains with a lot more than just our neck, right? And that this is part of our how we move about in the world. So I love the, this is something I think is a particular intelligence of neurodivergent, like highly intelligent neurodivergent women, is that there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing broken about us. This, like Megan said, this is a superpower. And I think that when we start to see our bodies as not, or maybe even our symptoms as not a deficiency, but actually a signal, a very intricate, complex, like inner dialect that our bodies are giving us these messages, then, that's a very personal, individual kind of dialect, like a language that you can understand. And that's kind of been my experience the more that I've kind of tuned into how my body is feeling, because emotions are actually body feelings. And when we have experiences like a stress happens, adverse childhood event, or interpersonal violence, or systemic violence, or whatever we're experiencing, pollutants, all these different things, the stress and the stressor might be gone, but the stress is still in the body. And all of those different things converge with, the connections like Megan mentioned, that Western biomedicine is finally beginning to catch up with what, ancient systems of healing have obviously known for since the beginning of time, is that we're whole people and that we're not, separate systems. And then, so I don't know, that's such a huge question, but I think that like on an individual level, that's been my experience with, I guess, what is neurodivergence. I'm not like diagnosed, but I kind of avoid allowing people to speak over my body or to pathologize me or to give me I'm not a great patient, and a lot of pharmacists aren't, but so I'm sure like if I went and pursued medical treatment for some of the things that I experienced, then I would be told this and this. Like, for example, one of the things that I experience a lot is physical sensations that are sometimes like uncomfortable or even painful or even like super distracting depending on my stress level and how much I ignore them. So like with our bodies, a whisper becomes a louder voice that becomes a scream if we don't listen to it, right? And that is what manifests as disease. And we know that like if somebody's chronically ill, chronically stressed, it turns into chronic illness. So, there is the illusion of separateness between our thoughts and our imaginations and our experiencing and our health, our biology, our physiology. That illusion of separateness is not true. It's a made up thing. It's just not true. We are whole people and we always were. So that I think is really interesting for me, like as somebody who has like the medical training and the really technical understanding, but also a deeply embodied emotional experience rooted in much more than that, is how like obvious that is, but how much we pretend that that's not in status quo medicine.
You both touched on the term superpower, and I know that that's kind of a divisive term in the neurodivergent community, because for a lot of people, I think it's that, and I was of that camp at first. I had a late diagnosis. It was in my mid 40s, and I'm like, this is a superhuman power that I forgot the vegetables in the vegetable drawer. Yay! Where's my cake? Right? But when you put it in the terms that you were discussing now, Simi, about having this being an internal dialogue that is happening, you can at that point see how this is a superpower, that you start to better understand your own signals that your body is giving, and then taking that a step further and saying this isn't just about understanding your internal dialogue that is happening with your body, but realizing that this isn't just one system, that this is our entire body, and taking a holistic approach to it, I think would really help people who are watching this series and saying superpower, whatever, right? And then realizing, wait a second, I do have a little bit of a superpower to be able to be more in tune with my body and understand these signals more, and then be able to get there. On a personal note, when you were talking about sensitivity to outside stimuli, I have learned the hard way that when I am doing a lot of these recordings and I have to have bright lights going on, right, because we want to be illuminated and look nice for the video, I suffer the consequences later on if I don't take that time out to give myself some moment to stay away from bright lights, to kind of bring my system back down to homeostasis. And if I don't do that, the mood stabilization is thrown off, the patience is gone, headaches, pain, you name it. And when I realized, oh, it's the lights, like I'm not being a baby by saying it hurts my eyes to see the lights. So I think that's a great way of looking at it. So let's talk about pharmacokinetics, which is a word I am not familiar with, and the consumption methods and research-backed benefits of each.
So just super high level, there's a few different forms of consumption, right, that we can decide to use. And some of it we can base on the absorption and distribution throughout our bodies. And some of it we just base it on our lifestyle and what works best for us. And going back to what we were just talking about, sensitivities, and what feels right to us. So The first, oh, I shouldn't say the first option, but the one that we often think about first is smoking or inhalation. And when we either smoke or vaporize cannabis, it's a rapid absorption of cannabinoids into our bloodstream through our lungs. And we typically feel the effects fairly quickly, right? Within minutes, but it's also kind of short-lived. The high or the feeling you get or the relief that you feel is only a couple hours. So these cannabinoids, they hit our system, they quickly travel to our brain. We get this fast onset of effects. So for someone who wants that really quick relief from symptoms, it's a good option. But then you also have to consider, like, is this something, you know, if you're at work, can I just hit my vape pen really quickly, or go outside and smoke this? Or if you're within like at a certain event, can I do that? So things like that you want to consider. The other option is oral ingestion. So, you know, eating it in some way. Is that a pill, a capsule, an edible, you know, whatever it may be. So those cannabinoids are absorbed through our digestive system, and that can take longer. So that can be anywhere between 30 minutes to maybe 2 hours. So you have to be prepared for a little bit of that waiting game and figuring out how exactly that works for you. So, you know, we eat this, whatever the cannabis product is, the molecule then, you know, goes to our liver. It goes through something called the first pass effect, where it's creating this, you know, new molecule that is then going to our brain and producing the effect. And this molecule can sometimes be a little bit more potent than what you would get if you had smoked that particular cannabis product or that cannabinoid. So kind of depends on how much you take. People will say the effects are a little milder, although if you eat too much or it's a little over what you should be taking, well, then it is a godlike experience. But these usually have like longer lasting effects compared to inhalation. So this might be a good option for someone who has like chronic pain, or there's a sleep issue. So you want to take something that's going to last you throughout the night so you can get that quality sleep. But you have to bear in mind, it could take anywhere between 30 minutes to 2 hours to kick in, and also the food effect, because, you know, if you take some of these cannabinoids with like a high fat diet or meal, that could change the absorption, versus if you were to take this on like an empty stomach. So you could feel different effects depending on, you know, what you're eating. You could also use something like a tincture, where you might be putting the liquid like under your tongue or on the cheek, and the absorption is faster than if you were to completely eat it, but it's slower than inhalation. So back to that Goldilocks analogy. So it's kind of right there in the middle, and the effects are moderate, and they're longer lasting than inhalation, but not as long as if you were to ingest it. So this might be a little better option if you can't, you know, smoke at work, but you want the onset to be somewhat rapid and you don't want to wait those 30 minutes to 2 hours. And then the last one that you usually see is topical application. And I'm sorry, your cat just climbed the chair and it was so funny. And this is like cannabis infused creams or balms or an oil that you're going to apply on your skin. So the absorption is localized. You know, it's, if your elbow hurts and you put it on your elbow, that's where you're going to feel the effect. It's not going to really circulate throughout your body. It's going to basically stay in that area of application. So you're not going to feel that high or any of those like psychoactive feels. Put it on your elbow, it stays on your elbow. That's the end of the story. So that's the pharmacokinetics of the different consumption methods that you could possibly choose from.
I'm so
I
glad
love that you included topicals in there, because I think they're a really underrated method of delivery, especially for neurodivergent people. Can you talk a little bit difference between like a topical balm, like when I sprain my ankle, I put on a topical balm every day for like 2 weeks to keep the swelling down, and something like a transdermal patch?
Oh, do they have transdermal patches? I know when I started it was a thing, and then and then they like took them off the market, and they were like,
You
"This is so
don't
bad."
see
But
them.
that was in Pennsylvania, so
Yeah, you don't see them often, but I've seen them a little bit in California, and I hope to see them making a resurgence in some of these East Coast markets as well.
that would be nice. So
I
transdermal. Oh, go ahead. Go
oh
ahead, Simi.
on the transdermal patches, I actually talked to it was caregivers of an adult autistic young man, and the transdermal patches. So they were cutting the patches to get like a very small dose, but it was delivery like delayed delivery. I think it was a 12-hour patch. So it releases slowly throughout the day. And that is so transdermal patches, it's like a sticky patch that you place on the skin and then it absorbs slowly. And there's a lot of different medications that are delivered that way. I think that but for that person, for that patient, that made the difference for him to be able to like go and function, to go to his job, to go around people, to that particular delivery method was everything for him. And they were so grateful that they had found that, because it was like, the caregivers were saying this completely changed his life. So I thought that always really stuck with me. And I think that transdermal patches should be, that like we had all kind of mentioned, they're hard to find. I don't often see them in where I live in Oklahoma, but I think that is something that could be really beneficial for a lot of folks, not just neurodivergent folks, but like, chronic pain patients, or, for sleeping through the night, or for that, like I've got to work a 2-hour shift, my back hurts, whatever it is, right? So I think that's a really interesting method. On the other hand, I feel like because we know that so much of cannabis research has been like the funding, if you look at the funding, so much of it has gone towards studying the harms of cannabis. And so it's pretty incredible how little we know compared to how ubiquitous, like how many people are using cannabis, versus how little we know about basic things like metabolism, absorption, distribution. I mean, those are things that with FDA approved products, traditional pharmaceuticals, they have to do all kinds of studies and show all kinds of data about that. And so we're behind in terms of what we know about that. And that's really unfortunate, because that has a real impact on real people not being able to get access to things that can help them.
I was saying I'm really glad that you brought up the sleeping aspect, because I think the statistic is like close to 90% of neurodivergents have some kind of problems with their sleep, whether it's falling asleep, staying asleep, or just the very quality of their sleep. So I know when I'm working with my clients, I explain to them, this edible is going to take a little bit of time, but it's going to keep you asleep. You might want to pair that up with either a vape pen or some flour, or even just a tincture, so that it gives you a bigger, quicker onset than otherwise. So yeah, it's an important issue for the people in our community to be able to have a higher quality and longer time sleeping, if you will. I'm curious about the transdermal patch, Simi, for the autistic gentleman that you had encountered. Was this a pure THC patch, or was this a pure THC patch, or were there other cannabinoids involved?
That is a great question. I believe this was a pure THC patch. I don't think in this case that there were, they might have had CBD. It might have been like a 1-to-1 THC CBD. I'm not sure. But that is a great question, and some, a pet peeve of many of us, I'm sure, who are actually interested in cannabis as medicine, right? Instead of equating potency, high THC with better, right? Or higher potency. And it's unfortunate that so many people don't have access to that information, that there's so many other things. Cannabis is a whole pharmacy within a plant. It's not one molecule. It's not just THC. And the way that these other compounds, molecules, like whether it's terpenes that cause the aroma and the smell of all kinds of things, foods, plants, and cannabis, the bioflavonoids and how those interact together, the mindset that somebody is in, the rituals around cannabis consumption, all of those different things affect the ultimate outcome, right? But I don't know in this case what exact type of patch that it was. But I do think that there needs to be so much more education and information about this isn't just THC, and that more THC isn't necessarily better.
Thank you for saying that, because it really does feel that it's just the THC chasers out there. And I've been part of the cannabis community since 1998. No, before that, 1996, 95. And so I have seen the THC levels in our flower just increase, and it feels that it's skyrocketed in the last few years. And I attribute that to a lack of education and a lack of research on these other minor cannabinoids. It's
100%.
not just it's not just the THC that's going to be able to help people in our neurodivergent community. It's going in and understanding how the terpenes, the bioflavonoids that you were talking, things like CBG, how all of that can actually help impact and improve our quality of life.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And when I worked in the dispensary, everyone was just so enthralled with THC. And if I even mentioned CBD, because we didn't have a lot of options back then, this was a couple of years ago, people were like, absolutely not. I refuse to use CBD there. And when you ask why, it was like, well, I tried a CBD product in the past and it didn't do anything. And, I do believe them, because there's so many products out there and you really have no idea what is actually in them. But the second part was, well, I didn't get high, so it didn't work. So there's this misconception, if you don't get high, that means it's not working for you whatsoever. If I said, CBD doesn't have psychoactive properties, it's like, well, then absolutely not, because the therapeutic function and potential is in the high. And that was a misconception that I was constantly fighting against. Or when patients would come back and I would say, how did this product work for you? They'd say it didn't work. And I'm like, well, why didn't it work? What was your pain level before? Where are we at now? And, and they would say, I didn't get high. I'm like, but what was your pain like? Like, you came in for back pain. You said it was at an 8. What was it after you used the product? Well, I don't know, because I didn't get high. And I was like, well, could we then say, maybe the pain actually did get better because you weren't even focusing on the pain any longer.
Yes.
You were focusing on the high. And also, that's not why we're here. We're not here just to chase these high THC levels. So that was a perpetual fight in the dispensary. Really difficult to combat.
I could see that definitely being an issue. I know I've seen it in friends and colleagues, and once you kind of pass that turn, you make that turn on that corner and you realize, wait a second, this is something that is beyond just feeling euphoric. This is something beyond just feeling like, as you said, high, that it's going to improve my quality of life. That kind of brings me to the next point I wanted to talk about, which is, and Simi, you touched on this a little bit, the holistic approach to symptom management, including, other plants, diet, sleep, exercise, and meditation.
Yeah. I saw this put this way, and it really stuck with me. I can't remember who to attribute this quote to, but cannabis as a gateway to holistic health. I've seen that so many times that, because we talk about cannabis as a gateway drug, right? And we've all heard that with the prohibition focused funded research and everything. But I have seen this so many, many times that cannabis has been a gateway to things like plant-based eating or plant-based nutrition for people. When I taught yoga and meditation, so many students were coming to yoga and to meditation for the first time because of their experiences with cannabis, whether it was for that maybe the pain or discomfort was reduced, so they felt like they could move their body more easily, or maybe it kind of slowed down all of the stressors, and created a space to be able to say, oh wow, how is my breathing feeling? How am I feeling? How am I actually feeling? Instead of just being, that's another thing I experienced with neurodivergence, is sometimes I don't actually, it takes me a long time to actually identify how I'm feeling. I can become very numb with stress to any kind of any kind of sensation or emotion. So it's like, sometimes cannabis can be a gateway for that, like just to be able to, or to explore like other kind of creative thinking, to explore different types of thinking. And so it's really interesting. And I think that I've seen that so many times, that cannabis has been the jumping off point for people to say, oh wow, like, and that's something, I'd like to touch on with the concept of recreational cannabis use and the concept of like euphoria or being high. Couple things there. One is that, sometimes people have a really bad time with too much THC, with paranoia, anxiety that can make symptoms worse. But then on the other hand, like the concept of what is leisure or what is recreation is, to me, not really a clinical question as much as it is a socio-political one. And here's the reason why, is because, why, with like super wealthy, for example, folks, or people that are privileged within society, we don't think anything's weird about people wanting to then feel healthier or to then optimize their health, right? Like, I feel I'm generally healthy, but I want to feel super healthy. And this is something I'm going to pursue with all of these different things. Cannabis might be one of them, or it might be like nutrition, or it might be personal trainers, whatever it is, right? But if somebody's chronically under stress or chronically ill or systemically oppressed, or all of these different, other things going on, why is it then considered a leisure activity to also want to feel one's best? Why do we place a cap on how healthy or how well somebody can feel? Or why do we say just because you have the absence of abnormal lab tests that would qualify as a diagnosis according to these guidelines, then you are healthy, and then but you feeling kind of off, or not enjoying yourself, or not feeling as creative as you want to, or not feeling as present within the present moment? Why is that not considered like a need, like a basic need, or like a health choice versus? So I'm always kind of thinking about that, the way that recreational consumption versus that has a connotation, versus saying this is a person who's doing everything they can to optimize their health, has a connotation. And who does that get applied to, which narrative, and why?
That's such an interesting way of looking at it, because I think the majority of us came to this from a recreational aspect, right? And once we started using it, and particularly, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience and from the interviews that we've conducted so far, I would ask, when was the first time you got high? And when was the first time you got high and you noticed that this was something different for you, where you're able to, like you were saying, feel present, feel centered, and why is that shunned on? And to that, I say to people, even recreational use has its medicinal benefits to that. If to go back to what we were talking about with anxiety, for me, that's definitely a side effect of my neurodivergence. Paranoia, anxiety, overthinking, ruminating, that kind of stuff. And then once I started getting high and realizing that my brain was just a little bit more quieter and more peaceful as a result, and understanding that, hey, wait, this is possible. This should not be considered a luxury. This, at that point, was a need for me. So that's great that you're putting it in those terms. Megan, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, from like the nerdy side of things, because Simi and Lucy, you just captured like the holistic side and the spiritual side of everything. When we participate in like physical activity and exercise and yoga and everything like that, like we actually are stimulating the release of our own endocannabinoids, those cannabinoids within our body, like anandamide, the bliss molecule, and that helps us improve our mood and reduce stress. So we have cannabis, coming in, helping us fill those deficiencies, decluttering our mind, allowing us to kind of go deeper in ourselves, ask the tough questions and motivate us to go this holistic route. And then when we do participate in these activities, we're actually, creating more endocannabinoids within ourselves as well. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal, really. This overall well-being. And then when we participate in like a well-balanced, really rich diet, rich in nutrients, not rich in like truffles, you're supporting your endocannabinoid system in that way. And it's really essential for the synthesis of these endocannabinoids. So again, this like 2-for-1 deal, you are just supporting and building and growing and really helping that endocannabinoid system, your thermostat, go to that, that right temperature. And yeah, I think that's what I have to say about like the nerdy side of things. I know for myself that if I don't work out in the morning and I don't meditate in the morning and I don't get myself in this right mindset, that like my day's not going to go well. Like, and all of these like symptoms of I can't focus and now I'm overthinking and I'm overwhelmed and I'm spiraling out of control and the anxiety is just getting out of hand. Those are much worse when I don't start my day with meditation and working out in some capacity, whether it's going to the gym to lift weights or it's yoga or it's just mobility and flexibility. The other thing I want to say that just popped into my head, a runner's high. That's a real thing. The runner's high is a real thing. And we think that that's, happening because of, the anandamide that we're stimulating the release of, and that's why we feel this runner's high. Do I run? Absolutely not. Should I? Probably. Maybe that would make things even better for me.
So I would use cannabis in terms of exercise and diet, not the way you would think I should probably, but it was more of a reward system, right? It's like, okay, if you go take that walk around the neighborhood, you can bring a joint with you, right? Like, or if you go down and you run those 2 miles on the treadmill, tonight's a bong night, right? Like trying to find a way, like a reward system. And even if it's as simple as that, I would love to our community, for people who are watching this, to understand, like, even if you're using cannabis in that, very like reward system way, to be able to get you to do that diet, to get you to do that exercise, so that way you can help your personal endocannabinoids get to the level where you're at, then it's such a better place to be. And the runner's high was like, I remember I was like, this is a myth. This is never going to happen to me, right? And the first time it happened, the first time I had the runner's high, it was very surreal, right? Because I could not understand how I was feeling this good and just energized, and I felt like all of the cells in my body were vibrating. And so to hear now that that's because of the stimulation that is causing within my cannabinoid system, I'm like, oh,
yes.
And it's again another 2-for-1 deal. There is a close interaction with the endocannabinoid system and dopamine, and that is our brain's reward system. So there's this endless rewards here, rewards on rewards on rewards.
We were talking a little bit about cannabis as a pharmacy of compounds and the entourage effect. Would you like to expand upon that a bit?
Sure. So when we're looking at cannabis and we're only looking at one cannabinoid, like we're only looking at THC, we're shortchanging ourselves, because cannabis is just composed of so many different chemical compounds, whether it's cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, et cetera, and all of these compounds, they interact with our bodies, particularly our endocannabinoid system, in different unique ways, and we still don't understand the ways that all of these things interact or what they're working on. We have a far way to go, but the entourage effect in this idea of like a pharmacy of compounds suggests that all of these compounds will work together, and they produce a more significant and a more beneficial impact on our body and our mind than if each compound were isolated and used individually. So for example, you can think of THC and just use it as for pain, and that's it. And maybe that works, and that's great. But if you were to bring CBD in with it, so you have the THC, it is helping with pain. The CBD could come in and it could help mitigate some of those psychoactive effects, and also is beneficial in terms of anti-inflammatory properties. So we get a little bit more bang for our buck. Or we can bring in, some of these terpenes that could be more beneficial in reducing anxiety or providing more of a calming effect. And we couple that with, insert whatever cannabinoids. So the idea that they work better together, there's more bang for your buck when they're all together, or there's certain combinations versus just a singular compound or cannabinoid.
I love that. Simi?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think like when the pharmaceutical kind of mindset is being applied to something that is a living medicine. Like cannabis is a living, alive plant. It's not a molecule, right? And so, so with the pharmaceutical mindset, there's this pressure to distill everything, reduce everything down to here's a molecule and here's a receptor, and then we're going to adjust the molecule to fit better into the receptor, and that equals better than this primitive plant medicine. But this plant medicine is very, very intelligent, and it's co-evolved with us. This is older than old. Not only did cannabis and yoga and traditional, Eastern medicine co-evolve in the same region of the world, it's older than that. So even like insects and fish and things like that, every animal has an endocannabinoid system. We would die without it. We would not be able to survive or function without that. So I think that, so I think that it makes intuitive sense to me that it wouldn't be just one molecule and one receptor that's causing this diversity of effects, and that we've co-evolved to have that. And something I like to just kind of a quick story is in India, where my family is from, cannabis really does grow like a weed. Like you will see fields of hemp growing, and cows will be like munching on it all day. And that's, a huge part of how people live, is very connected with the earth. I mean, that's like our ancestral land. And, how much of those compounds and cannabinoids, phytocannabinoids, were always part of my, part of our bodies, right? And so the idea that we've segregated that, well, first of all, made it illegal, and then said it's, we're going to reduce it to molecules is so bizarre to me. But anyway, so like I guess an analogy for the entourage effect that I like to think of, or kind of an analogous type, health experience that many of us have had that makes it very familiar, is like healthy practices that also help our endocannabinoid tone or endocannabinoid balance. Like, so for example, sleep. If you get a terrible night's sleep, then you have other chronic health conditions, it makes all those things worse, right? So if you get like terrible sleep for a couple days in a row and you have chronic pain, there's a good chance that pain level is going to be worse. Or if you get terrible sleep and then you're exposed to like a cold virus, there's your immune system is weakened as a result of that. So that's an example of how things work in tandem within our body. Same with nutrition. Like if you have excellent nutrition, you're going to have a better functioning of all of these other systems. And it's very similar in that sense that it's not something you can reduce to just one molecule. It really is a symphony with all of these different sounds, and that can go different directions depending on not just what's in the plant, but also what's in your body and at that particular moment, and the intention that you set, and the set and setting. So like your mindset, the situation, the setting that you're in, and all of these different factors produce that medicinal effect. It's not just that one molecule.
I got to tell you all, this has been an amazing conversation to be able to have your perspectives on this and be able to see not just the fact that people who you come with such a strong scientific background, but still comprehending how this is a very holistic approach. And it's not one, as you were saying, it's not like the molecule fits in here and you put the puzzle piece together and then you're done. Like there's more to it. So this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're coming up here at the end of the time. So just real quick, if there's any like closing statements that you want to make sure, if there is something that you're like, oh, I really wanted to talk about this and Lucy didn't ask me the question.
Well, I could probably talk all day. That's that's the neurospicy thing where I'm like, I'm over here. But no, I'm really grateful that you asked me and Sophie to be on this podcast. I really appreciate it. I'm so happy to speak about neurodivergence in cannabis, and I'm really excited and just hopeful in seeing that we are talking about this more often. And we're bringing it to the light, and people aren't afraid to speak about it any longer. I feel like we were kind of in the shadows for a while, and so we're slowly breaking down stigmas. We're saying we have a voice, and we want to be heard, and we want to be studied. And I really do believe that we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding and learning and finding all of the therapeutic potential. So I am truly excited and really hopeful for the future. So thank you for having us on and having a podcast like this so we can share our thoughts and knowledge with the world.
Sure. Yes, wonderful. I just to echo what Megan said, I'm super grateful to be on in this conversation, and this gives me so much to think about. I could nerd out about it all day. I really love the concept of so like to me, the innovation, that the true innovation that's happening in cannabis is not about, as we talked about, like a better way to grow or like more potent THC or more about the molecules. It really is about this, what we're doing right here, which is communication, sharing experiences, education, real experiences from real people. And then how do we connect with that? And how do we hear somebody else's experience? I would say particularly with the neurodiverse community, how we learn from each other and hear, oh, that makes sense to me. I've never had language around that, or I didn't know that, right? And so sharing those ideas and communicating and educating for the community, and also for healthcare professionals, because we aren't exactly trained that way. So it's a new way of thinking, and I love seeing more of that happening in my world.
Awesome. Thank you. Jess, are we missing anything?
That was amazing. It's like a little masterclass in cannabis and pharmacokinetics, and that was wonderful. Thank you both so much for being flexible with us and rescheduling and working with us on the questions, because I am so happy we got to have this conversation.
Thanks for joining us for an episode of Living in the Weeds. That's all that we have for today. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe to support the channel, and we'll see you next time.